Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa M. Brown, and I am your host for the evening and moderator. I am happy to be here with you on tonight. And you know what we like to do? We like for you to shout out where you are watching from. Let us know what city and state you are watching from. We ask you to also do us a very big favor and share this programming on tonight. We're excited about our guest. And so let us begin. Tell us where you're from. Let us know. I see you, Quentin L. Robinson. Thank you for being faithful to us. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is representing tonight. Chantel Lorenzo, thank you. Bronx is in the house. Miko Mo, thank you. McDonough, Georgia is here. Chicago is in the house. Thank you so very much for joining us. Chicago, I see you. Houston, Texas is here. Toronto, Canada is in the house. We're so glad about it. Brooklyn is here, always in the place. Fort Lauderdale is in our vision tonight. Thank you, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for being here. Raleigh, North Carolina is here. I see you. Bradley, Illinois. I like it. Bay Point, California. Fort Worth, Texas. This is so good. I see you, Alvis Ward Jr. Thank you for joining us tonight. Cali is representing. Los Angeles is representing. Pensacola, Florida is representing. El Sobrante, California is here. Las Vegas, Nevada is here. West Virginia is here. Harlem is in the house. I love it. North Hollywood is here representing. We're so glad to see you. Keep shouting it out, keep letting us know, keep posting, and we want to make sure that we don't miss anybody. I know you all have been trying to keep up with what's going on in the world and what's been happening in different states, what's been happening in terms of elections, but we're still here. We're going to give you everything that you need on tonight. with this brand new book, and we're not going to shout them out yet. Baltimore, Maryland is here. I see you. Thank you, Baltimore, Maryland, for being in the house tonight. We appreciate you so very, very much. Want to shout out our producer and tech person. So glad that Pastor Susan is on with us tonight. We're grateful. Thank you for all you do, Pastor Sue. And so we're gonna get right to it. We're not gonna delay the time anymore. We're gonna get right to it. And tonight we bring a very great guest in our mix. She's Dr. Keri L. Day. Dr. Keri L. Day. So appreciative of the work that she's already done and been doing. She's the Associate Professor of Constructive Theology and African American Religion at Princeton Theological Seminary, but she is also the author of several books. And tonight we've come to discuss her new book, Azusa Reimagined, A Radical Vision of Religious and Democratic Belonging. Dr. Keri Day, do me a favor and please greet our virtual audience tonight.
Well, thank you, Bishop Vanessa Brown. It is wonderful to be having another conversation with you and Bishop Flunder. I am so excited about this discussion tonight, but I must admit, it's like having conversation with family, because that's precisely what TFAM is for me. And so I'm just looking forward to the lively discussion.
You are family to us, and we always thank you for your brilliant work. And of course, certainly, we are going to go on tonight with our presiding bishop, in the person of Bishop Yvette A. Flunder. She's the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, also the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California. Bishop Flunder, please come and greet our Facebook, YouTube, and our LinkedIn audiences on tonight.
So you have to know I'm just plumb tickled. You'd have to know that, right? I am just so thrilled to be in conversation with Dr. Keri Day, and to know that she has written the book that essentially we have in so many ways been talking about needed to be written. And the Spirit of God moved upon her to say the things that need to be said about our joint heritage at Azusa Street, where it all began for those of us who call ourselves Pentecostals. And I am so, 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 so very glad. So very glad, because I want to continue to be called Pentecostal. But I know someone had to come along and speak to not only what happened at Azusa Street, but what the impact of that experience should mean and can mean to those of us who also consider ourselves progressive theologians and progressive believers. I want to thank God, because a greater person couldn't be chosen. Somebody who loves Pentecost and will still dance if you hit the B3 organ the right way. I love you. I love your mom and your dad and your wonderful husband and that incredible baby girl. And we are so, so, so glad to have you with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. And we certainly want to mention Bishop Carlton Pearson tonight. He could not make it, but we're going to go on with the conversation. And Monroe, Louisiana is here with us on tonight. Fredericksburg, Virginia is in the house on tonight. And we're just so very, very happy to have this conversation. Somebody said, we've been talking about this book for 2 years now. Thank God. So we are here, and I'm, just... I guess the exciting thing is when I come to Keri Day, Dr. Keri Day, Bishop, you have to know that she's family, because she always says yes. And I'm just so grateful for that, because this is a book I believe that people need to hear. And I'm going to get right to it. Azusa Reimagined. First, just tell me and tell our audience why the impetus, what was the impetus for this book, and why now?
Yeah, so maybe as a way of entering that question, at least for our conversation on tonight, there were 3 important, what I like to refer to as centers of interest, that I think sort of sit inside of this book. The first one, and actually there's been a lot over the last several decades already written on the Azusa Street revival being sort of a powerful counter to the white racist racial milieu of the day. You think of David Daniels' work, you think of Cecile Robeck, you think of Gaston Espinosa, you think of Estrelda Alexander, Cheryl Sanders. I mean, the list really could go on and on of folks that have already, sort of articulated through a scholarship why Azusa should be seen as subversive and not merely as sort of apolitical, classical Pentecostalism as apolitical or as pre-political, not coming into a modern sense of consciousness concerning what it should be oriented towards. So that work has been done. But so the first center of interest for me was in some ways to show not only that Azusa as a community was subversive to the racial habitus of the day, the white supremacists, but to show that Azusa was an outright critique of the racial capitalism of the day. And the reason why racial capitalism is so important, because it brings to bear all of the sort of intersectional forms of structural racism, I think, that often gets swept underneath the rug in scholarship and in the popular cultural imagination concerning classical Pentecostalism. So when I speak of intersectional forms of structural racism, I mean the question of gender, of women in the movement. I'm speaking of how just not to think about the place of queer people in early Pentecostalism and the Azusa movement, but the Azusa movement as a queer movement, thinking queerly theologically about early Pentecostalism and what that means for us today. And so for me, in order to capture all of that, I wanted to be attentive to, and I do this through, historiographical research, through, as you saw, newspaper clippings and newsletters and sermons and all other kinds of literature as a way to capture that in many ways Azusa, even as, for example, its liturgical practices. I talk about tarrying, for example. All of this in some ways can be read as a wholesale critique of the racial capitalist ecology of the day. And so I think that's why it's distinctive, but it's especially important for today, because the second center of interest to this book is Azusa offers a much more expanded understanding of political agency itself, right? So I try to, in some ways, resurrect what's actually going on with how they're embodying the apocalyptic. Right. And we can get into that. I won't go into that right now. But in some ways that their embodiment of the apocalyptic is profoundly subversive. And it's actually, according, even Cedric Robinson, author of Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition, also situates early Pentecostalism as in the tradition of Black radicalism because of the work that it's doing. But you think of the apocalyptic, that's been something that has been jettisoned by much of not only scholarship within religious studies, but within Black religion, as essentially withdrawn, as apolitical. And again, we can talk about that. And then finally, to answer the second part of your question, why today? The third center of interest for me related to this book is this sense of Azusa was politically moody concerning the political instruments of the state. I mean, you have in some ways the upper and middle class African Americans, much of those folks we reference when we're talking about early 20th century from Reconstruction onward. What does it mean to speak about the sensibilities of those who were literally on the underside of early 20th century modernity, right? These were the poor of the poor, right? And not just Black folks, but immigrants and other kinds of folks that are converging on at the Azusa Street revival. And how then does that allow us to think about, of course, Azusa was politically moody about the political instruments of the state. What can that teach us today about how we might think about American democracy? Listening to communities that I argue in some ways are politically moody, are pessimistic, are suspicious about thinking the political instruments of the state can save them. Think of not just Trump, but Trumpism, white populism that is steadily rising, even without Trump. So I'll stop there, but those are the three centers of interest that in some ways enter the question.
Those are great centers of interest. I'm going to bring Bishop Flunder into it. But before I do, I want to talk, first of all, to say Oregon is here. Oregon City, Oregon, Chicago, Nashville, North Carolina is here. Atlanta, Georgia is represented here. And again, California. What I want people to do is I want you to share. And I want you to share with your Pentecostal friends and your Kojic friends, because they need to hear this conversation. Dr. Dave, you have 6 chapters. And that's what I love about the book too, because it ain't got to be all thick and big. And, it's 6 chapters. It's succinct. It's precise. And you get right to it. You gave us the 3 areas of interest that you kind of grew roots from, right? And so now we have capitalist visions of Pentecost. You have toppling white evangelical and market orthodoxies. You have Black female genius, which is probably the first one I'm going to start off with. You have Azusa's erotic life, which is going to be the second thing I'm going to start with. And then you have lawlessness, a critique of American democracy. And of course, something that you just mentioned, a democracy to come, embracing Azusa's political moodiness. And so, Bishop Flunder, I just want you to say a few things, and then I want to get to the Black female genius, because I know that Bishop Flunder is going to have a lot to say about that as well.
Well, I'd like to add just a couple of other things to your question list, and then I think we should just let her loose. One of them is I think that it's important to reflect on why did this Pentecostal movement succeed with the many others that were a part of this time. And we all know that they were together in different ways, seeking to be one thing, to overcome racism, to move toward, can we find a unified baptism? There were a lot of different things that they tried, but this was the one that seemingly, at least numerically, did succeed and supersede in many ways the others. And I think the other thing that I have to say is that I would love for Dr. Day to make a parallel of a sort between what happened with Dr. Maddie Moss Clark when she involved or allowed her daughters to be involved in being in secular venues, singing gospel music, much like Mother Shirley Miller and the Hawkins family did, and that she was deeply ridiculed by the executive boards, bishops' boards of the Church of God in Christ, and told that she could not do that. She was almost shut down altogether as a result of that. I would love to make the parallel between that and the way in which she feels the Church of God in Christ has responded or will respond to the experience of Twinkie Clark and Beyonce, and the fact that it is sort of like a redo of the experience that Dr. Maddie Moss Clark had trying to get or allowing her children to be heard in secular venues. Now there's this opportunity, this relationship that allows some parts of their music to be woven into the music of another secular artist. Let's talk a little bit about that dynamic, perhaps as it relates to the roles of women and how that fits into, and I think you understand the heart of what I'm saying.
I think it's also leading to that whole chapter on Black women genius. Absolutely. Okay.
Can I go ahead? It absolutely is leading to that chapter on Black female genius. So going back to the first question, because really it enters so beautifully into that chapter. Why did this Pentecostal movement succeed? I think it would be important for me to first sort of qualify what I mean when I speak of the significance of this movement, because there are some that would easily sort of object in the sense of, well, wait a minute, the Azusa movement succeeded within its first year, and I write about this in the book, if you remember, in the second chapter, within the first year, it was embattled, right? Where you have an entire portion of the white saints or of the white constituency that pull out because you have Parham, you have Durham, you have different white ministers that are coming to Azusa that Seymour trusts initially, that end up sort of departing from him, right? And in some ways, naming him, labeling him as demonic doctrinally for ritualistic practices and so forth that we can get into. And so some might say, well, if we're thinking about Azusa on the grounds of, did it accomplish what Frank Bartleman said, one of the biographers, that it accomplished, that Azusa erased it erased the color line and it sort of washed the color line in the blood of the Lamb. It erased the color line in the blood of the Lamb. Then for some, it would be the answer is no, because it's embattled within its first year. And that battle, the battle continues, and it is so fierce that at the end of Seymour's ministry, he actually rewrites the policy of the leadership policy of the apostolic ministry, and essentially says that the only person that can be pastor or bishop or preside over this particular ministry is a person, really a man of color, right? This is not something that he wrote at the beginning of his ministry as they were founding Azusa. So I want to set all of this up to say that for me, when I speak about Azusa's significance, that it is one of the most significant movements of the 20th century, is to say that in some ways, and I'm using here Margaret Nash's, a historian, her understanding of flashpoints, that the measure of the significance or quote unquote success of a movement is not because it has perfect longevity in the sense that it accomplishes some ideal, right? One could say it's a horizon that we're always going toward, but rather that at particular moments, something other than what is possible within society emerges as a flashpoint, right? And in that moment, we are able to see the impossible made possible, right? So if we take seriously flashpoints, that at particular historical moments, there are encounters that emerge that remind us of what's possible, and that in and of itself is significant and is successful in terms of really getting our imagination going on what is possible. Then in some way, so for me, Azusa is significant in that way. So what made this movement successful in the sense of significant? Number one, I believe it was true to its indigenous roots, right? And to speak about the indigenous roots of Azusa is to speak about the women. It's to speak about those women, and this is not to say men were not involved, right? But it's very clear, and this begins in the praise houses, part of the plantation houses during slavery, where you have the women that are the guardians of the slave religious practices, the religious rituals, right? These are the religio-cultural practices that would actually be the context out of which Azusa would find its liturgy, its worship, its conversion experience, its way of thinking about community and so forth. And so first, to me, it was sort of true to its roots. That's important because the roots of slave religious practices, that was something being debated among Blacks, period. Middle to upper class Blacks thought that these were pagan retentions from Africa. They were demonic, seen against the horizon of Western white Christian orthodoxy, right? Here we have something else. We have the children and the grandchildren of previously enslaved folks who make a decision to preserve those indigenous practices, and not only to preserve them, but to make them the grounding of what would be the worship experience of people across racial affiliation. And that's pretty, not just powerful, that's pretty subversive. Because if you think about a white person coming in to that particular environment, and you have I think it's over 100 articles written alone by the Los Angeles Times in the first 2 years of the movement. Police were being called down to the movement. The question is, why is all this going on? Because you have not only a countercultural assembly across racial affiliation, men and women mixing, as I talk about, they call it in this embodying free love and lust and queerly interacting, right? That word comes up again, queerly interacting. But then also what you have is you have a group of people, particularly white folks, that are being initiated into the religious conversion experience through slave religious practices, that is Black practices. And for whites, this was an affront to what it essentially meant. It's one thing for whites to simply worship with Blacks and Blacks worshiping on the terms of whites. It's a quite another thing for whites to be initiated, literally their subjectivity, their religious subjectivity, into the religious experience in and through these practices. That was something very so for me. It's these practices, right? The being true to these religious practices that spoke to the lives of not just African Americans, but the poor, immigrants, and so forth. Gaston Espinosa writes about this very eloquently, that some of the religious practices deeply resonated with people that were immigrants from other parts of the world, right? So you have all of this, but then it's also the women. And I don't want to keep, because I know we want to have a give and take here, but it's also the women that are absolutely key. It's not, as I talk about, we speak about the founder of Azusa and therefore early Pentecostalism. But how does that erase thinking about founding as a collective endeavor? What does it mean to talk about what Seymour is birthed out of, right? Lucy Farrow, the niece of the famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass, Neely Turner, Julia Hutchins, I could go on and on, that this is the context out of which Seymour's own form of religiosity is birthed. He would go on to serve as pastor of the movement. But what is maybe silenced or under articulated in not sort of foregrounding these women, their religio-cultural practices that spoke not only to Los Angeles, to this nation, but eventually to a world, right? Where they're going out, they're doing missionary activity. But the difference, one could argue, between, say, a Methodist historically going to a foreign land, a white missionary, and missionizing, and some of the African Americans that were going, and Harvey Cox writes about this in depth, is that, and when they're going abroad, they're inviting people abroad to, one could say, depend, but to integrate their own indigenous practices in shaping their own forms of Christianity and Christian spirituality. So I could go on here, but a bit of my book really attempts to capture, and this is important because we talk about Beyonce. We talk about Maddie Moss Clark, what she experienced. We talk about, Dorinda said, don't y'all leave Beyonce alone. Leave her alone, y'all. And she's chuckling, because if there's one thing that Black women, including in the Pentecostal tradition, have understood, is that our religious forms are complex. This goes back to the indigenous root, right? They are complex. They speak to this is gospel music. Gospel music is not a kind of pristine music. It comes out of the amalgamation of jazz and blues and all different kinds of musical forms. So that gospel was seen as the devil's music when it first emerged, right? Worldly music. And so Maddie Moss Clark, Dorinda, Twinkie, all of them they understand, right, that what Beyonce is doing in that music is in some ways giving voice to the complex, honest realities of church girls around the nation, right? Who want to love the Lord, but experience their lives in all of its messiness and grotesquerie, but that there's beauty and celebration, even in the midst of all of that, of what it means to be human.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Bishop Flunder, for that, to raising the whole Beyonce issue up. I think that, just to add a little bit more to that, just a little bit, so that I don't deviate off of the subject matter. But the fact of the matter is that when we talk about Black female genius in that particular chapter, we all know that it is the women who help to sustain these churches till yet. They are the ones that help they help to build these churches. They help whatever, whatever they were doing in the kitchen, whatever they were doing, what I mean, in terms of selling things and trying to make things happen so that these churches could exist in the first place. Of course, not just the financial part, but just also the spiritual part, how they worked and toiled on their knees in prayer, right? They prayed these churches into existence. They prayed these churches into sustainability and all of the things that follow. So I think that that's a very big part of the Black female genius as well.
And if I could just add to that, and I know he's going to chuckle when he hears that I said this, but it's such a great objection that I have to state it and sort of what my response was, because I think this is an important point that ties to what you're saying, Bishop Vanessa, that it's built off of sort of the labor and the pennies of Black women, the Black women genius. And I take this from Saidiya Hartman's work. I need to like say that I cite in the book, where within sort of the industrial capitalist economy, and even today, Black women were measured by not just their labor, but like literally by their body parts. What it meant to be an enslaved woman is always to potentially suffer rape, right? What it meant to in Reconstruction after slavery, still to be a Black woman, is to suffer harassment. I mean, Rosa Parks, the 1940s, her first civil rights advocacy was not the bus, not getting up from the bus, but actually advocating for Black women that had been harassed, sexually harassed, violated, and raped, right? So I mean, this is so critically important. But there's an objection, and it is my good friend Marlon Milner had this objection. I think it's a good one to linger with, and that is, well, it is built off, and part of the Black women's genius is that they created something that for generations allowed Black communities to survive, right? To find forms of joy and transcendence and meaning making and so forth. But his question was, but how does that not, if you're careful, how does that not end up reinforcing what Dolores Williams will refer to, the very problem of surrogacy that Black womanists and Black feminists attempt to foreground and argue against? And that is, and when I say surrogacy, what I mean by this, so for hearers, they may not know what I mean, is that Black women are often asked to suffer in the place, right? So whether it's in the place of white supremacy, in the place of Black patriarchy, where, we might do these things, but we die early. We live under profound amounts of stress. So that in some ways, our labor, our bodies end up being used in service precisely to in this case, say the Black heteropatriarchal order. And so my only response, I love to have this conversation. My response to that is, and this goes back to this notion of the complexity and the ambiguity and the unresolved contradictions that Black women are already always in. Right?
Always. That's right.
Already, and that's Black folks, period. Okay, because to live in this world, in this country especially, is to already live in an anti-Black environment, and to still navigate in making meaning and in creating institutions and forms of subjectivity that we can live into, that's worthy, right? That we can commend. And so for me, I think that surrogacy issue is a serious issue that we hold in tension. But I also think what the genius of these women is that despite that issue, they are finding ways to be defiant and in some ways to oppose and even, I would say, implode what is expected of them, say from the industrial economy, which was, no, you simply work, you're not a subject, you are an object, right, to be used and discarded. And these are women in some ways that demonstrate, embody subjectivity to resist, to defy. Yes. And I think that matters, right, when we're speaking about Black women.
Really quickly, Bishop Flunder wants to say something, but I just needed to tell you that Marlon Milner is on.
Oh, good. This is good.
He said, fix it up, doctor. Fix it up, doctor.
Hello there, beautiful son. We're glad you're with us. It's wonderful.
I thought he'd be here.
Yeah. There's one thing that comes to my mind. In the not too recent past, Dr. Henry Gates came over to our church, and we started talking about the black church again, this time with the PBS special that will be coming up soon, part two, essentially, of the black church, talks about black preaching and black gospel music and the ways in which those things connect to one another. And he spent some time with Shirley and I, Mother Shirley and I, talking. But there's one thing that came to my mind that while we were talking about this, that so much of our music during the seasons uh, in the history of the growth and coming of the Church of God in Christ had to do with heaven. It had a lot to do with going to heaven and going to heaven and going to heaven. And I remember, particularly among the women, that just about every other song we sang had something to do with going to heaven. All of our congregational songs, a lot of our choir songs, and it continued on into where the groups sang together and sang about, 12 gates to the city, hallelujah. So just a lot of going to heaven among women. So, I want to lift that up to your point that one of the things that held, I think, women in place during this time of subjugation and sometimes suffering and feeling that the strength that they had to be used essentially to diminish themselves in order to make their male counterparts stronger or appear stronger in public. It did do things to the bodies and cause them to be short-lived and cause them not to take care of illness when they had it. But the counter to that was, but we are going to heaven. And everybody sang about going to heaven. And the harder it got, it seemed, the more going to heaven songs. And then all of a sudden, gospel music took a turn. We have very few songs now that talk about going to heaven. Almost every other song back in the day had something to do with going to heaven. Now we are talking about being strong and being powerful and being loved by God and making decisions and doing the work of ministry in the earth, and lots of God love songs, lots and lots of God love songs. And I would like to suggest that perhaps some of what we are seeing in the present realities of our beloved church is that folks are thinking more, and women in particular, more about, I'm going to get some stuff done while I'm here that's different to what my mother and my grandmother was able to do. I think the absence of all this eschatological concepts about the only way that women are going to be made free, I think the absence of that is the presence of moving towards self-affirmation. To your point about Dorinda saying, y'all leave Beyonce alone, okay? There was a time that no one would say anything, essentially. Something has shifted. And I see this as your next book. Okay, this little Flunder is on it. What is the future now? Beyond Maddie Clark, beyond Twinkie Clark, beyond all of the mini Maddies and the mini Twinkies who are the generations of Pentecostal women. You are a generation of Pentecostal women, Dr. Keri Day. You are a generation, and you have an answer in your soul, not just what you write in your books, but you have an answer in your soul that liberates you to say the things that the people before you just sort of decided, if we go get there, we have to go to heaven. Right? You go to a laptop. There has to be something that shifted. And I want to just lay that out there and say, I am hearing another voice. from Pentecostal women's music, Pentecostal women's writing, Pentecostal women's declaration and preaching. Something very different and powerful is coming this way. Thank you for giving me a minute, Bishop-elect Vanessa.
I think that's good. I'm going to let Dr. Keri Day answer, but I just wanted to say, I do hear what you're saying, Bishop Flunder, that there is something new. There is another voice that's rising up. I mean, there was a time when, we all know that nobody would be going for Kiki Sheard at all. They would not be listening to her music. Even when Bishop Drew Sheard has come in as the new presiding prelate, they yet still have a problem with Kiki Sheard and her brother, right? Right. So there is a generation that say, hey, we moving forward. And there's a generation that saying, no, we gonna hold on to some of the old things. So I feel like there's that pull, that push, that pull, that push. And let me just say another thing, in terms of Dorinda and Tweaky, smart girls, smart women. Because at the end of the day, get your check. That's all I have to say. Go ahead, Dr. Day.
I love when family can be honest. So one of the things that is deeply concerned me, and I think I'm at a stage in my career where I can be more intentional about, especially given, TFAM and other communions that I think are supportive of what I'm about to say. And that is, I do hear kind of a new, you could say, rumbling, a turning, going on with this generation, even younger women than me, that come out of Pentecostalism. But right now, one of my biggest concerns is that they come out of Pentecostalism, but by the time they become liberated and have a more progressive perspective, and for many reasons is understandable, given their childhood denominations maybe or traditions, part of living out their vocation for them means moving away precisely from the communities that need to hear them most. And at one point, I was the same way. I mean, I had friends that really got in my face and said, and I write about that in the acknowledgement section of my book, of, wait a minute, you're a Pentecostal woman. What do you have to say to this? That sort of woke something up in me in terms of turning back to my communities. And so for me, I think part of, I would say, the striving, the struggle, the goal is to begin gathering these voices, providing the platforms, the resources, whatever it is that needs to be provided. And not just that, I mean, there is a very great silencing power that attends to powerful forms of religiosity. Okay, forms of religiosity that are violent, that are dehumanized. So I do get all that, and I do, so there's a thin line between asking people to do this and self-care. But I do think that, as you're talking about, Bishop Flunder, both of you actually, Bishop Vanessa, the time has come where, what does it mean to talk about a gathering, a great gathering of not just, as I write about, so I don't mean to move over to Notes of a Native Daughter here, but in some ways it's reflected in Azusa Reimagined as well. Not only Black women's voices, but I want to talk about Woman X voices broadly, Black queer voices, right? That to me covers the gamut of the different kinds of voices that are emerging that we desperately need in this moment, that Pentecostal communities. But I think that, that's going to take some real strategic thinking of the spaces and the places where these folks can enter, given their histories with these traditions, and then as well some bridge builders between these traditions and the newness and the power, the potency of these voices. So I agree with you, but these are the sorts of things that sort of move in my mind about the lay of the land.
There's a myriad of things. You are so right. Bishop Flunder, I'm sorry, I wanted to let you get in on everything that was Dr. Day was talking about, Black queer Pentecostal women, bridge building, gathering the voices, all of those things.
And it's interesting because percentage wise, just like any other group of any other gaggle, a group of Black folks, you're going to have the same percentage of those Black folks being queer, whether they are Baptists, whether they are Methodists, whether they are Pentecostal. Pentecostal church has the same percentage, and I'm pretty much, if anything, sure that percentage wise, in certain of the much more conservative Pentecostal movements, the more conservative the movements are, it seems the more present queer people actually are. And I have flunderisms about that. There's a part of me that believes that some people are titillated by closets, and they would just really rather be in places where they are constantly doing the sneak game. You know what I mean? That there's something about that. It adds to the juice of the whole thing, if you understand what I'm saying. But the truth is, there isn't a place. There just isn't a place, and there where queer people are not. Just like there isn't a place where women who are have a certain sense of self-worth and self-value and understand essentially who it is that they are. There isn't a place that those women don't exist. It is more that they would rather exist in that place because there's something about it that they like and love than to exist somewhere where they can be fully who it is that they are. Some of them will, because it's a fantastic fashion show. Some of them because they're content with the actual unspoken power that exists because they know they have a power over dynamic. It looks a certain way, but it is another way. Some of them because they're the greatest fundraisers in the church. And they know that at the point at which anybody really disrespects their role, all they got to do is pull tight on those purse strings, and all kinds of things will cease to exist. And I can say honestly that I know that is true in many of these organizations. So there's all sorts of underlying dynamics. My hope, my real hope, is that we will come to a place where the truths that you have lifted up, that in this particular denomination, which we are a part of in our history and in our hearts and our deep love, that the time will come when the powerful things will shine and continue to shine without having to pretend that they don't exist or have them somehow subverted, because we have a way to be that makes us comfortable. And I'll just say one other thing. It's sort of like if you take a look in England, Bishop-elect Vanessa, and you go to the horse races and you see the hats. Have you ever seen the hats? Because
Yes.
those are the most like great women church hats of any group of people on earth. When the British come out for their annual horse racing events, the high end, where the queen comes and the princes come and the person who is being lined up for the throne come, part of the experience is the parade of hats. And I said to somebody the other day, when they think it's fantastic, I said, that is only because you have never been to the women's department's official day in the Church of God in Christ. The Baptist women cannot do what I'm talking about right now. They just don't have it. I mean, I'm sorry, Baptist sisters. I don't mean to diminish you at all. But there is, except maybe the Nigerian women in a different look, but there is not a group of women that are on the planet that can walk that walk with that hair and that hat and those pumps like a long line of Church of God in Christ women. They are fabulous when they come. And there are things like that part of the tradition that in many ways I am so sure the couture of the Clark sisters. I just need to just put it out there. You'll never see those outfits twice. You'll see them once. And I don't know what they do with them after they take them off, but they don't have them back up because they're too fabulous to wear them twice. There's something about that part that I think we have to grab hold to when we talk about the way in which Dr. Keri Day speaks to the freedom from being a part of what was then and is now the status quo. That the Church of God in Christ is a statement to the world. This is how we're going to be. And this is what we're going to wear. And this is how we're going to do black. And this is how we're going to walk around. and this is how we're going to do. This is the way we're going to sound. This is the way we're going to shout until we get finished. And somebody keeps on saying, well, we got to break, we got to stop. We got to stop because we got other things to do. And they're doing it, saying it, knowing that it's not going to happen. They know full well when they say we got to stop shouting and let the service continue. That's just another way of saying keep shouting, because they're going to shout until they get done, because it is a part of the subversive intention that this great woman is talking about tonight, to be all of who they are in the truest sense of the word. If we can, however, eliminate the oppression, if the oppression can be eliminated, imagine what an impact I think this denomination that you've so beautifully written about, again, think what kind of impact it could have on really changing the negative political environment and the oppressions that women, queer people, and many others also experience in this church.
And I just wanted to end, just to follow up on what you're saying, Bishop Flunder. I think another challenge that the book presents, say, to contemporary Pentecostalism, neo-Pentecostal, so Kojic would be one, is I really try in the second chapter to forward an argument that it is not helpful to see Azusa merely as sitting on the horizon of Western Christian orthodoxy, or as merely kind of another instantiation of Western Christian pneumatology, that it's about the spirit, that something else is going on, is happening. I talked a little bit about that earlier with indigenous practices, so that you have white ministers coming down and literally saying that this particular movement is demonic, not only because of its practices, but eventually what would be different doctrinal positions, right, of various denominations that will come out of Azusa. But I'm thinking of Charles Long here and how this is applicable to our discussion. The historian of religion, Black scholar Charles Long, where he says in Significations that America, and I say this almost in every talk, so people that have followed my talks, it's such an important statement that he says, America, this country, does not possess a hermeneutical dilemma. America is a hermeneutical dilemma, in the sense that America does not interpret itself rightly. Right. It's not that it just has a series of bad interpretations, right? But that literally America understands itself as a land of freedom and liberty and prosperity, and sees slavery and Native American genocide and other forms of isms as sort of a part of a tainted past, when the country was in ignorance, but sort of the country has emerged from that as a colorblind society. But to me, this is really, really important, because I think what one could infer from my book, what does it speak to contemporary Pentecostalisms, is that today, if you look at the history of Azusa, of early Pentecostalism, at least this strand of early Pentecostalism, that I would argue denominations like the Church of God in Christ, they just don't possess a hermeneutical dilemma. The Church of God in Christ is a hermeneutical dilemma, right? It interprets itself wrongly because of the theological framework that has been handed down to them. And so to me, part of even being able to have a conversation with these denominations and the ways that we're having, it is about like orthopraxy, right practice, right action. But it seems to me, this is the reason why I took pains at really detailing in that second chapter what I was after and speaking about Azusa as a heterodox movement, is for contemporary Pentecostal traditions to be able to enter into this more self-critical, reflexive posture where they are questioning literally the entire theological framework that has provided their identity, right? Parts of this theological framework that are profoundly problematic. And one could argue have nothing to do with the ancient Christianity of Acts. So for me, I just wanted to add that everything you're saying is so true, but really there's a hermeneutical problem that we must attend to, that is fundamentally a theological problem.
That we must attend to is correct. Is correct. Thank you so much for that, both Bishop Flunder and Dr. Day. Again, to your book, chapter 4, Azusa's Erotic Life. Say more about that chapter. Now, before you do, I need to encourage you all to go and buy the book, Azusa Reimagined, at Amazon. Go and purchase the book. You want to buy this book because you want to know more about what she is saying. And I can tell you that the way she unpacks it, you're going to understand exactly the direction that she's going in. Azusa's Erotic Life, Dr. Day.
Yeah, so and I'm gonna make sure I really search for non-technical language here. Because I know some of the viewers here are academic and others are non-academic, but have a real interest in what we're talking about. So when I speak about the erotic life of Azusa, I mean, first, that chapter is connected to the world fairs that I'm talking about in chapter 1, if you recall. And part of what I'm sort of bringing over from chapter 1 into this chapter is that there is an erotic life of racial capitalism first. So the question is, what do I mean by erotic in this chapter? I mean it in a twofold sense. First, I borrow off of, and I cite her extensively, Sharon Holland's work, a Black feminist, a scholar, in which she speaks about the erotic first simply as a desire in all of its contradictory, complex, and one could even argue grotesque forms. But what's interesting about how Sharon Holland talks about the erotic is you think of first generation Black feminists, and I wrote about her in my previous book, Religious Resistance, Audre Lorde, that thinks about the erotic as that effective feeling and energy and love that connects us to the deepest parts of ourselves and others. And she distinguishes that sort of against the pornographic, which is the lewd, that which is not in service to oneself and others, towards connecting us most deeply to who we are and who we aspire to be. And so first, I want to say that that's sort of what I wrote about in a previous book. That's the position I took. And I sort of changed my mind. So I think it's important for intellectuals to say when they've changed their mind, because I'm asking Pentecostal traditions to change their mind. So I changed my mind here in speaking about the erotic. And Sharon Holland asked a really interesting question. What if the erotic as simply desire, as an encounter and an effective feeling, can sort of undergird encounters and events that are fundamentally marked by racism, by racist experience? We think of racism as structural, and it is structural. But racism also depends upon a series of encounters, a series of effective energies, right? About intimacy and bonding and belonging and all of these things. So that part of what it means to build a racist ecology is to build an ecology that provides the binding and the bonding effectively or emotionally, the stuff of what people need, right? To buy in. And that's the emotional lifeblood of it. And so for me, when I speak about the erotic life of racial capitalism, and queer theorists have written about this for like several decades now. They've really taken the lead on this, is that when I speak about the erotic life of racial capitalism, I'm talking about the ways in which for example, the world fairs that I referred to, the exhibitions, the consumerism that is present there, that this entire production is meant to cultivate and foster a particular kind of white intimacy, an encounter, an effective feeling of binding and bonding among white folks, right? That can then sort of be used, that can be used in service to racial systems, right? And so that's in the first sense, is I do a lot of work and talking about and what is it about the erotic life of Azusa then that is countering that particular form of desire that is so grounded in white intimacy and white bonding and white belonging, that is commercialized and commodified in all these particular kinds of ways that I'm talking about in the book. That in some ways Azusa turns that on its head through its liturgical practices, through its forms of fellowship, and so forth. And I'm not going to let you into all the details because I want you to read it. but that in some ways is doing this. So I mean that in the first sense, but then there's a second sense, and that has to do with y'all. I mean, the idea that some stuff was going on in those walls, as the old folks would say. Something was going on. I see Bishop Flunder right now. Something was going on in those walls. So the second part of the book literally looks at, sort of in a secondary definitionary sense of the erotic, sensual and sexual, that the sensual and sexual energies of the revival, you see the movement, are being suppressed, are trying to be contained. And I sort of narrate one aspect of that, namely through many of these women that served in ministry with Seymour. Some of their husbands were upset at what they were doing, and an entire sort of conversation that's and really actions and eventually policy, the position that Seymour would take surrounding sort of policing the sexuality, the sexual decisions, say the marital decisions or whatever, of these very women that he worked with, because of the pressure from the outside world, right? For this movement to comport with the gendered and sexual norms of the day, not to mention that you had a number of white evangelists such as Alma White that were coming down to the revival, and they were explicitly naming the revival as a mixture of queer people, as embodying free love. And that was a huge like liberal term then, when you spoke of free love, right? That meant that was counter to the heteropatriarchal system of the nuclear family model of marriage. And more specifically, it was deviant to Christian life. Really, I should say the white Christian life. And so it's also delving into that. But all of that to say, when we're speaking about religion, okay, when we're speaking about, in this case, Azusa Pentecostal, but I say religion more broadly, we're always and already speaking about the erotic energies, even if suppressed and silenced, that are a part of a particular movement. And in a small way, again, it's just a chapter. So I really hope that more of this work will be done, actually. But I at least wanted to provide a little bit of how we might think, how we might theorize, how we might talk about these erotic energies and affectivities that on the one side are deeply problematic, right? That sort of fuel and fund racial capitalism, the erotic life of racial capitalism, desire that is corrupted, that is used in service to white intimacy, white racist intimacy and bonding, but then also erotic in this other sense of sort of freedom and sexual subjectivity and agency that we see being already policed in the first to second year of the movement and of the revival, which speaks sort of to the imperfect shape of the revival, even in the midst of much of the liberative activity that was going on. And I'll just say this and I'll end. And this is really important for me because in the introduction, I at least try to make it clear that in interpreting the Azusa revival as a subversive form of Black religion, all I am really asking for is for early Pentecostalism, a la the Azusa revival, to be read in a complex way, similarly that we read or interpret other Black religious forms, such as the Nation of Islam, such as Malcolm's life, in which Malcolm, his racial analysis was awesome, but we know he had issues on the front of gender and sexuality, right? Black liberation theology, of which womanists have critiqued, and so forth, right? I'm not saying that Azusa now is the only or the exemplary form of Black religion, but what I'm asking for is, what does it mean to read Azusa in this way for the complex character that it holds, similar to many other Black religious forms?
I'm gonna let Bishop Flunder loose, but before I do, there's something that you mentioned early on. So the policing that was happening for a particular reason. It was happening because you made mention of it earlier. The LA Times, I think, or the LA News, they were there every single day reporting on this revival. When I say they, it wasn't Black people reporting, it was white folks reporting. Reporters were white, and they were reporting what they felt, what they saw through their own lens, right? Of course, that's going to get washed down, that's going to get passed down, and now people are upset because now Blacks and whites are doing things that in their eyes they feel they should not be doing. And so it got blown up, and here we go. So I wanted to make sure I said that, and I linked that to even some of what has happened or what happens today in our news. Right, folks start reporting. Right, the news starts reporting, media starts reporting until something implodes in a particular situation, in a particular institution. Right, not that it needed to implode. Right, but it's that sometimes we even have to be careful about what the media is saying about our institutions, what the media is saying about our religious walk, what the media is saying about our women, what the media is saying about our children, what the media is saying about how we worship and what we do. Okay, so go ahead, Bishop.
Yes, and amen to all of that. And I hear, you know, very clearly, much of what it is that we're talking about right now is between the ways in which Joseph Seymour was destroyed, because he was destroyed. Let's just be really, really clear that he was destroyed on purpose by the people who essentially sent him out to do the work, because the work was too successful and because it was accomplishing a goal that required doing something about what were previous, perhaps the roles of women, or previous the roles of Black people. He succeeded too much, and consequently, Parham came and basically destroyed the work, broke his heart. I believe that he began, in some ways, dying that day. And that I think about that, it is very sad to me. But what came from it, as much as it was, and let me just roll back and say that I think a lot of founders, the real founders of some movements, were lost that way. And there are others who come along and pick it up after, that in some ways benefit in incredible ways. One of the things we have to do is remember the bridges that crossed us over, and what it took to get to the point at which there could even be an argument that existed among all of these Pentecostals, whether they were oneness or Trinitarian, or whether they were black or white. There couldn't have been an argument without the work that William Joseph Seymour did. But when we move to that work, I'm also very clear that moving to that work was a bit of privilege. A privilege. There has to be a bit of privilege that didn't pre-exist all of this for the Black people to feel that they could go forward, take the name that they chose, and say to the white people that left, bye, Felicia. If you understand what I'm trying to say, if you feel like you got to go because you don't, because we are biting at a gnat and swallowing a camel, you feel like you have to go, but your real problem is racism. You thought you could overcome it because you had so much Holy Ghost, but it just couldn't do it, right? It says a lot for a group of African Americans during that season to say, if God be for us, who really can be against us? That's unthought of in some places right now. But for it to be unthought of essentially in that season, I've been to Mason Temple. I slept in the little apartments that are built on the side of Mason Temple where the state mothers and district missionaries and such, because of the powerful women in my life, both in my family and Dr. Mallory and others who impacted my life when I was coming along, carrying her purse and carrying her Bible to Mason Temple when Bishop's body was still there. Bishop Mason's body was still there. And I say that because they did take power as African Americans to build their own temple, to do their own work, to have their own presence, and then superseded the white flight that left the church and built something that is outdistanced the folks in number and in value and in longevity. Even with COVID having decimated a goodly number of the top level leaders, it had opened the door in many ways for some leadership now that probably wouldn't have occurred if COVID hadn't occurred. There seems to me to be something, I'm looking for the right word. Dr. Day has all those wonderful words inside. So I'm still looking for the right word to describe how their resilience and resistance created a long-term reality that doesn't have any real end in sight. It's that kind of powerful. And if we can kind of grasp what that is, and perhaps finally help to get it to the closets, how do we get that tenacity and that determination to go forward and to succeed no matter what? If we can get it to the closets, if God be for us, really, who can? I mean, that is the testimony. If God be for us, who can be against us? And let me make this confession. One of the reasons why I believed that we could pull together a group of Methodist-Baptist-Costal, LGBTQI and affirming people and develop a movement was strongly because I came out of a movement that, against all the odds, believed itself called by God to do the work. I look at us often like the new Pentecost, because our determination is to succeed, but to be radically inclusive, filled with extravagant grace and relentless hospitality. Apart from that, it's that determination. They prayed me through to determination. And I do know that that is what really made the difference. And it made me, and it also made Dr. Keri Day, and it made Marlon, it made you too. It made all of us in so many ways who were touched by that reality to believe that we could think differently but still powerfully, which is all that they did. Think differently but powerfully believe themselves to be called by God to do what they were called to do.
And I'll just say this very briefly because I know the time very. And in some ways, at least in a sort of in a more theoretical register, in that fourth chapter, when I'm fourth or fifth, I can't remember, maybe it's the fifth, on lawlessness, where I'm talking about the apocalyptic sensibility of Azusa. I also talk about sort of, and this is to your point, Bishop Flunder, the way you put it, the community did growing up and who these women were, that I talk about that Azusa really reflected sort of embodying a politics of re-existence, right? Which so they're not concerned with reproducing the ends of the state. We have to remember, we speak about the sort of the purposes and ends of the state. Religious movements absolutely are a part of that reproduction process, right? And so, I mean, we think about the white political right, absolutely a part of that process, serving the ends of the state, of a particular kind of state of white populism, of a kind of Trumpism, and so forth. I mean, one could say equally for liberal. I mean, to me, there are holes in the kind of progressive liberalism that we even see today that are not, in my opinion, really in service to Black folks, and to queer folks, and even to women. And so, for me, I think what I see at Azusa, I mean, it's precisely in some ways what you're saying. And although I only dedicate 3 or 4 pages to it, I really want to take some time to think more about this actually for a future project. But that they were developing a new rhythm, a new way of being that was not threaded through the dominant political institutions. Right. And so what Ashawn Crowley actually attempts to write to this in Black Pentecostal Breath as well. So that this politics of by Ashinte, I should say, I'm citing Ashinte, that politics of re-existence is so critical for us to think about. What is that? What does it mean? What do we mean? What are we attempting to cultivate in terms of an otherwise world?
What is the new Azusa?
Yeah. Now, Dr. Day, I know we have to go, but like I cannot leave without you saying something about the 6th chapter. Just a little bit.
Okay.
But I want to encourage the people to buy the book.
Yeah.
Go and buy the book.
Buy the book tonight. Don't go to bed until you get online and buy one for somebody else you love.
That's it. That's it.
So the last chapter, Democracy to Come, I won't get into Derrida except for to say that Democracy to Come is something that is eschatological for this particular Jewish thinker, deconstructionist thinker, that is more or less about a kind of a procedural arrangement, say, that we have right now, say representative democracy or parliamentary democracy, and more of thinking about it as a way of life and involving, when we speak of we the people, involving a kind of democratic taking in of the plurality of voices as we negotiate. But really the chapter, it's a democracy to come. So it's anticipating Derrida's eschatological vision about a democratic life, but it's doing that by drawing upon Karen Bray's work. She is a brilliant scholar. If you have not read her work, she has a book called Grave Attending. And partly what I argue is that we have to gravely attend to those right now on the underside of, particularly Black folks, but people of color, Black folks on the underside of neoliberal racial capitalism today, as well as the religious forms that tend to reinforce those forms of deprivation and degradation and so forth. But what's really important, what I mean by grave attending, is that it's important to listen to the political moodiness, the political pessimism, the political suspicion of those who, as William Julius Wilson and Patricia Collins as well talked about, as the underclass, those that are unemployed or underemployed, that are culturally locked out, right, of most of the things that we find to give us cultural meaning and belonging. We see this in the inner city and in other areas, right? Where literally there are folks who are not only economically deprived and locked out, but culturally locked out. And part of my argument is that in some ways, these communities, they resist being redeemed, is what Bray talks about. Becoming the productive worker and citizen that the racial capitalist order sort of says one should aspire to. And that in some ways they are then unredeemed. They look upon this order with suspicion, with a sense of political moodiness that it cannot save them. And partly what I'm asking is, because this is Azusa in some ways, they're saying the instruments of the state cannot save us. This is something to really linger with. This is after slavery, reconstruction, a form of neo-slavery emerges, right? So in other words, it's like, it's not that structural racism has ever left, it's that they're reinventing the forms of racial and gender and other kinds of oppression. And those at the bottom are experiencing the brunt of it, right? Black folks, Black communities. And so they're politically moody about the state. Likewise, part of what I'm arguing is that there's a way in which we must gravely attend to the political moodiness, that the unredeemed in that sense may have something to teach us about what we should politically do, that maybe we don't even know what we ought to do until we have listened to the voices of the unredeemed. And I know I had one, reviewer that said she's not offering a political program here. So how can she call it, a democracy to come? And I'm saying that's precisely the response that I wanted, because the political program is listening to the unredeemed, is a kind of epistemic humility about the limits of what we can even say about what is needed for the political future, because so much of what has happened today has gone so terribly wrong, particularly for those, again, who are the least of these on the underside.
That's just brilliant. Thank you for your brilliant work. There's nothing else to be said. I do want to give yourself and Bishop Flunder an opportunity to give a final word, something that you want to say, that you want to leave with the people, if you will.
Buy the book. Just make sure that you buy the book. It's going to be so important in the upcoming days to apply these ideas and concepts. We do not have to have the same cyclical experience that we have every time we make 4 advanced movements forward and we lose 3 being pushed back. We can make some decisions. If we make 4 advanced movements forward and we come back 1 step, one of our things doesn't work out, that would be a great victory. And right now, we need more than we ever have needed before to have the things that we have put in place have long-term sustainable realities attached to them. And that, I think, begins with being clear about not allowing our own faith to be used against us over and over and over again. We have to know where we've come from to be very clear about where we're going. Buy the book, and let's have some conversations about the role of Pentecost. And let's see if we can have Azusa new all over again. Thanks.
Thank you, Bishop. Dr. Day?
I'll just say 2 things. To the academic, we need more folks inviting scholars such as myself to talk about the theoretical, theological, methodological interventions that studies in Pentecostalism has made and continue to make, like my book. I think it will really, it is shifting the terrain of religious studies. So I would just say to academics to be more intentional about really bringing in scholars like myself, because there's a major shift going on in religious studies and even in theology right now. And to the non-academic, to the religious leader, the clergy person or whatever, for those that there's always a Nicodemus in the bunch, somebody listening, they afraid, they're like, oh, I'm not really sure, I don't want to, so they're listening. Have no fear, stop the fear. We need to have these conversations. And so invite folks in, like myself or others or many others, to have these kind of conversations so people can get free. And to those, I would say, that are like Pentecostal, but they're like searching for home. They feel uprooted. They're coming into this new awareness. I would just say, get connected to TFAM. That's it. Get connected to TFAM.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Day. Thank you for all that you've brought to this conversation. Congratulations on the new book. And I encourage our Facebook Live audience, YouTube, all of our virtual audience, LinkedIn, everywhere you are, go and purchase the book. There's just so much to be learned, so much to know, and so many other things that are emerging, that are happening, right? There are new things that are happening that never happened before. There's new information that we didn't know before that we know now. And so I'm so grateful for Dr. Day and all of the other scholar friends who put so much work into digging in deep into Pentecostalism, and because we need it. Because we need it, because the world needs it, because our religious institutions need it. One of the things I know for sure and for certain is, when I was in seminary, I was even afraid to tell people that I wasn't Pentecost, right? Because it was the way that they made you feel. It was the way they made you feel a certain kind of way. When you entered, they made you feel small, right? Like, the only big religions, the only big institutions could be Presbyterian or some other kind of denomination. So to say you were Pentecostal, there were a lot of reasons why, people didn't want to go to school in the first place, because some people came out talking about their experiences, how they didn't feel embraced by it. But I'm so grateful for the scholarship and the academics that have come in. And even when I did my dissertation, I did some writing on Pentecostalism. So that was a part of when I did radical inclusion. That was a part of what I wrote about. So it's important that we continue to share this information for the Pentecostals that are coming up, because they're not going away. We're not going nowhere. It's a part of our heritage. It's a part of who we are, right? So they're just coming and they're coming and coming. But I think that the more informed that people are, is particularly some of the young people that are coming up. Like, I think about choir music. I think about Vincent Bohannon and SOV and all of these people that are coming up with these young choirs and stuff. These kids are committed and dedicated to Pentecostalism. But there is a way that it can be new. There is a way that can be fresh. There is something about it that can be reimagined. So I want everybody to go and buy the book. Thank you for joining Beyond the Gatekeepers on tonight. We want to give you a few advertisements, and then we want to move on. Thank you so much. Beyond the Gatekeepers, Bishop Flunder is going to give this announcement.
God bless you. God bless you. I encourage everyone, hear the words that have been spoken tonight. There is no Christianity without passing through Pentecost. We must do what we must do in enabling ourselves to get a fresh vision of Pentecost. And you've heard it here tonight. And I want to encourage you. This kind of teaching and opportunity for reading and expanding our thought is the heart of Beyond the Gatekeepers. Please support our broadcasts. Continue to help us to grow and to expand. I know you've been blessed, and I want to encourage you to seed into what blesses you so that we can expand this reach. Send a donation via Cash App to $TFAM annual or through PayPal, www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. And for God's sake, beloved, buy the book. Expand your own understanding of what Pentecost really, really, really does mean. God bless you is my prayer.
Thank you, Bullet in Flight Radio. You can find Beyond the Gatekeepers of Bullet in Flight Radio. Download their app. It can be found on iPhone and on Samsung. We have Antonio Mattier, a lifestyle realtor. Donate to your church. Give to your church while accomplishing your own goal of home ownership. Lifestyle Global Properties will donate 10% of the commission earned from your real estate transaction to your choice of COR, which stands for City of Refuge, or TFAM, which is the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, in your name when you utilize their brokerage to purchase or sell a property, residential or commercial, in California or Georgia. You can reach Antonio Mattier by emailing him at antonio@antoniomattier.com, or you can go to their website, go to www.antoniomattier.com. Thank you so much for your support. Please continue to support Black businesses. We have TNT Tuesday Night Talks, RIM Virtual Experience from RIM Fellowship United Church of Christ, where their lead pastor is Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams. You could go to her website, www.rimatlanta.org, and they are inviting you to join them every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everyday, real, relevant, Bible-led conversations. Please check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube at RIM Fellowship UCC. Thank you so much, Bishop-elect Sonia. We have the Healing Place Apothecary. Nubian Flunder is the LAC and founder. She is the daughter of our presiding bishop. She has her own company called the Healing Place Apothecary. You can go to www.thpapothecary.com. That's www.thp, which stands for the Healing Place Apothecary.com. There you're going to find products for your skin: root oil, daily greens, rose water, black soap, daily fruit, raw shea souffle. All of these things can help you help your skin. Please go and check out the website and make a purchase. Support Black businesses. And the kids are going back to school, and Sky Michelle is there to help you. Sky Michelle is the kid boss from Sky Michelle Tees and Things. Go to her website at www.skymichelle.com. Follow her on Facebook and Instagram at I Am Sky Michelle. She's got new t-shirts out. If you're going to the first through the I believe the 6th grade, you can get a t-shirt. The Let's Do It. I love it. And then we have t-shirts that talk about protect kids and not guns. So we're sending you back to school the right way. Please support Black businesses. And then we have Inspire. We have on Saturdays, and this particular Saturday, August 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Central, and 7 a.m. Pacific. We have a show called Inspire by Cara. The host is Sue A. Webley. She's the founder of Cara Solutions, highlighting BIPOC entrepreneurs, influencers, and creatives on a mission to change their communities and the world. And we want you to watch her live on the 27th. Our guest is Ty Allen Jackson. He's the founder of Big Head Books, LLC. You can watch her on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Twitter. And then you can also listen later on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts. Please support. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, you can do so by making sure that you email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you on next week. We've got great guests in store for you on next week. And so we want you to make sure that you share and let other people know about this conversation. Thank you for joining us again. God bless. Have a great evening. Very much.